Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome to the intersection of faith and the culture. It's WallBuilders Live. We're talking about the hot topics of the day and policy, culture, all of these different things, but we're looking at them from a biblical, historical, and constitutional perspective. And a little bit different perspective on Fridays. It's called Good News Friday. So we're bringing you some of those good news stories that have not been covered by the major media. And frankly, most of the good news stories I hear from David and Tim, I hadn't heard about anywhere. So I'm really thankful for the research and getting the good news of the things that are working well across the country, because we always hear the negative. We know bad things are happening in D.C. and in some of our states, but there's also a lot of good things happening because of people of faith getting involved in the culture. So we're going to cover as many of those stories as we can today on Friday. As I said, we're here with David and Tim. Well, that's David Barton and Tim Barton. David's America's premier historian and our founder at WallBuilders. Tim Barton's a national speaker and pastor and president of WallBuilders. And my name is Rick Green. I'm a former Texas legislator and America's Constitution coach. If you like the good news you hear today and you need even a little bit more, go to wallbuilderslive.com, jump into those archives. You can scroll back through the last few weeks and months and listen to more of the Friday programs, as well as the interviews and the Foundations of Freedom Thursday program. So there's a lot of great information for you there at the website, wallbuilderslive.com. That's also the place you can make a one-time or monthly contribution. We appreciate all of you across the country that have been doing that. Thanks for your support. David and Tim, let's jump in and get as much good news out there as we can today. David?
Well, I'm going to start with some things going on at the state level. Now, it's interesting. Since the election, we've had so much good news from the state level, not all that much from the federal level. And for the last 4 years, so much of it came from the federal level rather than state level. But this time it's really reversed. And literally, Tim and I have a stack of good news articles here higher than we've had in I don't know how long. I mean, I don't know that we've ever had a stack as big as what we've got right now. And if we could do about, I don't know, maybe 2 years straight of these programs, we might get through all of it.
Yeah, it's 100 or 200 pages of a stack. So it really is massive. And the reality is sometimes as we're going through the stack, we'll find stuff and we're like, man, this is from last year. It's not even as relevant anymore. So we don't even get to cover all of this at times. And all that to say, there is a lot of good stuff happening, stuff that doesn't always get carried in the media, especially not national media, but some really great stuff happening. So we are actually, the last couple of weeks, we've tried a new format on Good News Friday to try to do things to get more content, more good news articles out there. And frankly, it's because our stack is growing so high. We've got to get through more of this. But it is, that is, you're right. This is a massive stack, the biggest stack we've maybe ever had to do on Good News Friday.
And I'm going to go back to a couple weeks ago. There was a lot of clamor at the time about the possibility that we might be moving into a phase of hyperinflation that was going on. They combined that with the really low job numbers for that period, 266,000 new jobs. And, it was really looking bleak at the time.
Well, and especially considering that the early estimates were there'd be 1 million jobs added in that month or the quarter, whatever it was, and there was only 266,000, which saying only 266,000, that's still a lot added, but not considering that where the unemployment was and what they thought was going to recover. And many of those were coming back in the service industries, the people working in restaurants. It was good news that was opening back up. But speaking of the inflation, yes, lumber, right? I mean, we can go down the list of groceries and gas, and certainly prices have gone up. So we definitely are seeing inflation happen on some level.
Yeah, we are. And it's interesting, the state response to this. Now, of course, the federal government stepped back in with their sixth bailout of COVID a few weeks ago. And it's interesting that some people are attributing that bailout to part of the reason that the unemployment numbers aren't changing the way they're supposed to. And there's probably a lot of substance for that. I saw from Steve Scalise's office. Steve is the whip for the Republicans in the U.S. Congress. And Steve is pointing out that currently there are 8.4 million jobs in America where you have employers seeking employees. We saw that, for example, out in California. If you'll just come in and interview for a McDonald's job, they'll pay you $50 just to come sit down and interview. I mean, they're hurting so bad trying to get employees. And so 8.4 million, and you had this week with 266,000 new jobs. And you go, well, there's plenty of jobs out there. So what's happened is the states have said, okay, feds don't seem to get this, but we do, and we're going to stop spending money on things like this because there is work available. So Missouri just became the 13th state to say that, you know what? If you're unemployed in Missouri, or if you're unemployed in Tennessee or Wyoming or Utah or Iowa or Idaho, South Dakota, 13 states, we're not going to continue extending unemployment benefits from COVID because our states, and these are all red states, by the way, every one of these 13 are red states, our states have more jobs than we're able to fill right now, and we're not going to keep giving away government money for you not to work. when we have so many available jobs. So it's an interesting thing that states are really doing well. The red states are doing really well. People are going back to work, and that's a real good trend to have going in the fact that you're seeing people go back to work. Now, it's really bad on the blue states, and they're not doing that, and they're still paying money. And it's interesting that part of that COVID relief package, the one that only 9% went to actually COVID relief, so much of it went to bail out blue states who have terrible economies. And so all of us in the nation, including the states that are doing right, are having to pay for the states that aren't doing right. But the good news is that more and more and more states are getting out of this thing. They're coming out of COVID. They're getting back to business as usual, and that's a really good thing. And the other one that I would point to as being good news.
Now, David, I got to ask you before you do your next one, when's the last time that a governor has been willing to turn down federal supplements and money? I mean, this is a big deal that they made these decisions because they passed on that extra whatever it was, $300 or $600 or whatever that came from the federal budget. But that took some guts. That's a good sign too. Not just the fact that economically it's working, but some backbone in politicians.
That does take a lot of backbone, Rick, and that's good to see. And these guys are standing up saying, look, this is the right thing to do. And by the way, talking about how that things are kind of goofy at the federal level and the states are stepping up and showing backbone to do this, I don't even understand this, but having talked about the COVID package, did you know that one of the provisions in there in that package was that if any state takes this money, takes this federal money, you are prohibited from lowering taxes for the next 4 years. You cannot lower taxes in your state if you take federal money. Now,
are you kidding me? I have never heard. You can't lower taxes. They're actually going to prevent. That's kind of like not allowing voter ID. Sounds like they really want to control things.
Well, can you please tell me any clause in the Constitution that gives the federal government the right to tell states what their tax policies will and will not be? I mean, this is just unbelievable to me that the Biden administration has gone so aggressive in doing this. And so that was part of that COVID. I didn't realize that was in there. But the good news is 78 members of the U.S. House and Senate have joined with 13 states and filed a lawsuit against the Biden administration for saying we can't lower taxes. I mean, this is crazy. But again, here's backbone. Here's some political leaders saying, wait a minute, this is not the role of the federal government. By the way, we ought to be lowering taxes rather than spending stuff on crazy items and not allowing states to lower it. So, going back to what you mentioned, Rick, yeah, there's a lot of backbone starting to show up. And by the way, I'm looking here at a press release from ACLJ. And ACLJ has filed a brief in support of this federal lawsuit on behalf of 78 members from the Congress and all these 13 states. So there's a lot of pushback going. And again, this is the good news coming from the state levels. They're pushing back against this kind of stuff.
Very, very good stuff. And that's, we've been saying for a long time, work at the local level. The states is where we've really got to fight so many of these battles. So it's great to see some of these good results. So, Tim, where are you taking us with some good news today?
All right, guys, we're going to Iowa. And this deals actually with the U.S. Marshals. And I can tell you, anytime I see something about the U.S. Marshals, not that this is good or bad, this is just where my brain goes. I think of Tommy Lee Jones. And I'm not, like some of the people listening might remember some of the old movies, but like U.S. Marshals, the image I have in my head is Tommy Lee Jones. So anyway, that's neither here nor there. But the U.S. Marshals did something.
Chasing Harrison Ford, right?
Well, Harrison Ford, Wesley Snipes, right? There was a couple different movies.
The Fugitive. I got you. I get the same image in my mind when I think you. That's kind of weird. I thought we were two different generations. So that says something about the movie. It crossed generational lines there, and it owns part of our brains. That's great.
Well, definitely like that. The name U.S. Marshals, that is the image that's kind of ingrained in my mind because that was U.S. Marshals. Anyway, we would digress to continue, although it might be entertaining. Let me get back to this article. So in Iowa, the U.S. Marshals conducted an operation. It was called Operation Homecoming. And this is something we've talked about a little bit before, but we've seen this in several different states and actually several different agencies that have been working on trying to help rescue children. Some who maybe a family member had kidnapped them, so to speak, and taken them somewhere else. Some of these people were picked up at malls and different areas, but where children have been taken from their legal, lawful home, and in some cases, really terrible things were happening. And so the U.S. Marshals did what's called Operation Homecoming. There were 21 missing children that were located in the midst of this, and 7 that were recovered in some pretty significant details. And so in the midst of that, one of the things they highlight in this article is that U.S. Marshals were rescuing children in sometimes physical, sexual abuse scenarios where there was exposure to narcotics or child exploitation. But then they get into the details about some of the states they go into. And then they get into the fact that, for example, there was a 14-year-old from central Iowa. And they had, in the midst of some of their investigations, one of the things that very tragically we know is that there is human trafficking that is happening in places in America, that people are being kidnapped, that some of that stuff is real. It's happening. We've talked about before that in basically every major city in the U.S., there is an anti-trafficking task force. And it's something that you can look up, see what is going on in your city. Maybe you can volunteer, you can help, you can do things to help put an end to this human trafficking. There's a 14-year-old girl that they identify who was recovered in the midst of sex trafficking. They had gotten reports about these new girls that were part of the sex trafficking, and they identified one of these was the girls from Iowa they're looking for. There was a 17-year-old girl they found that had been taken from Iowa to Mississippi. And so they go through, but the point is that they've been able to recover many of these children. So 21 missing children were located. 7 of them were recovered. And just to clarify, so why would they be located, not recovered? Because maybe they ended up being with a family member, but at this point, they weren't a missing person anymore. And now it's a legal ordeal, but there's some level of resolution. Nonetheless, 7 of them were recovered from some of these more dire situations like human trafficking, whatever the case might have been. So it is really good news to continue to see these operations go on. And at a time when so many people have come out against the police, saying that we need to defund the police. And now you have different law enforcement agencies who are doing heroic things, and actually not just doing heroic things, because this has been the MO for many of these different forces and agencies for a lot of years, but you have exposure to some of these really great things that are going on along those lines as we look at the southern border and we see a lot of issues with cartels and obviously a lot of illegal immigration coming across. Some of the listeners might remember back in March, there was footage of Border Patrol. I think there also were some Texas Rangers in a boat, but they came up on a group of drug smugglers or human smugglers, but really drug cartel kind of people. And they threw a child out of the boat and tried to get away. And so you see somebody dive in the water to save this child. So this is an article highlighting that there was a special operations team of Texas Rangers. The Texas DPS said that the South Texas Special Operations Group has been involved in this, and they've been able to rescue and do many things. But in this scenario, it was a 6-month-old baby, a girl who was tossed into the Rio Grande. They were able to dive in and save this little baby girl. And as it highlights in this article, some of the things about this Special Operations Group of Texas Rangers, which first of all, as a Texan, growing up in Texas with Walker, Texas Ranger, right, where Chuck Norris played that character, you already feel something about the Texas Rangers. It's already kind of special. As a Texan, you think differently about the Texas Rangers. And I mean the law enforcement, not like the baseball team. The law enforcement Texas Rangers, you feel very proud of them as a Texan. But now knowing that they have a special
we
operations...
even have, for our non-Texas listeners, we even have a Texas Rangers museum, just so you know. We idolize these guys.
Well, I idolize them even more now, realizing there's a special operations group, because this is already an elite group of individuals, right? Like this is, in our mind, this is kind of like Secret Service kind of people, right? Like this is not your normal police force.
And by the way, I have to say, it was the Texas Rangers that changed the entire concept of warfare for the entire U.S. military. No question about it. What they did with revolvers and the way that they handled that in the Indian Wars, it's as crazy as the American Revolution.
And this is going back to the 1800s. When revolvers are being introduced and people thought, well, those aren't practical. Where are we ever going to need multiple shots? And when the Texas Rangers were dealing with some of these Western Plains tribes who were fierce warriors and really amazing shots with bows, how many rounds they could get off?
They could get off an arrow every 3 seconds. And
wow.
60 feet away could hit an apple from 60 feet away every 3 seconds. Now, you're shooting a single shot and you have to reload. Let's take 20 seconds. You can have 6 arrows in you by the time you reload. And the Texas Rangers convinced these guys, we need a gun that will shoot 6 times.
Well, so in the midst of this, Texas Rangers have a lot of neat history. There's a special operations group of the Texas Rangers, which also seems really cool. And their job that the team designed is to conduct both overt and extended covert operations where conventional law enforcement cannot operate, and usually dealing with drug cartel. So sometimes they're going in covert, they're going in undercover, secret operations. Anyway, a lot of cool stuff. But back to this 6-month-old girl that was thrown in the Rio Grande. Somebody dives in, rescues her. In the midst of that smuggling operation that was going on, cartel trying to bring people across the border, they identified just these crazy amounts that people are paying these drug smugglers to try to get them to the U.S. But the law enforcement were able to stop 67 adults and 150 children in that encounter and really protect them and keep them safe. But guys, we made mention of in the last couple of Good News Fridays how that police officers, law enforcement, so many of these groups are really doing so many good things. And unfortunately, the media likes to highlight one or two bad examples as they happen. And sometimes the examples they highlight were even justified shoots in many cases, but the media wants to blow it out of proportion because they don't see all the evidence. They don't want to get all the information. They're not very supportive of law enforcement, but we are so grateful for law enforcement, for our friends and family we have in law enforcement, for the listeners. We pray for you guys on a daily basis, literally. We have devotions every morning. And WallBuilders, we're praying for law enforcement, first responders, obviously our political officials, right? We have a lot of people we're praying for. Nonetheless, we're so grateful for law enforcement. We appreciate you guys. And these are just a couple examples of some really great things that law enforcement has done in the last couple months.
All right, guys, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. We've got a lot more good news for you, folks, so stay with us. You're listening to WallBuilders Live.
Hey guys, we want to let you know about a new resource we have here at WallBuilders called The American Story. For years, people have been asking us to do a history book, and we've finally done it. We start with Christopher Columbus and go roughly through Abraham Lincoln. And one of the things that so often we hear today are about the imperfections of America, or how so many people in America that used to be celebrated or honored really aren't good or honorable people. One of the things we acknowledge quickly in the book is that the entire world is full of people who are sinful and need a Savior, because the Bible even tells us that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And yet what we see through history, and certainly is evident in America, is how a perfect God uses imperfect people and does great things through them. The story of America is not the story of perfect people, but you see time and time again how God got involved in the process and used these imperfect people to do great things that impacted the entire world from America. To find out more, go to wallbuilders.com and check out The American Story.
Welcome back to WallBuilders Live. Thanks for staying with us today. It's Good News Friday. Let's dive back into more good news. It's back over to David.
Well, in all the executive orders that President Biden has issued since he became president, one of those orders dealt with a lot of the climate change type of stuff that's been the center of controversy for 25 years. And so what he mandated in that was that we have to reduce hydrofluorocarbons, or HFCs, and we have to bring down gas production, imports of HFCs by 85% over the next 15 years. And so EPA, has got this going. This puts the EPA back in big business again, because they're now able to crush businesses and companies and do all this and bring it down. So I'm going to introduce a name. See if you guys have ever heard this name before. Dr. Stephen Koonin. You heard that name?
Do not know that name.
Rick?
Nope, don't know that one.
Right.
Now, in fairness, the only medical name I've heard for the last 2 years is Dr. Fauci. So if it's not Fauci, I haven't heard of that one recently.
No,
That's Pope Fauci. Pope Fauci. You got to remember the COVID cult that he's king of.
Good clarification.
Yeah.
Stephen Koonin, need to go back a few years because he was with the Obama administration. He was in the Department of Energy for Obama administration. He was the chief scientist. And you remember where the Obama administration was on climate change and all the things that were going back there at that point in time. So here he was in the Obama administration. Now you've got the Biden administration. And it's interesting that when Biden came out with this executive order, what Stephen Koonin had to say was absolutely amazing. He says the notion that we've broken the climate is misplaced. Did you hear that? A guy from the Obama administration, head of the scientists, said, hey, the idea that humans is what's affecting this, he said, that's crazy. He said, I'm just quoting from him, he says, human influences are growing as carbon dioxide in the atmosphere grows, but beyond the warming of about 2 degrees Fahrenheit over the last century, we don't see many impacts on severe weather events. For example, heat waves are more uncommon today than they were in 1900, and they haven't gone up in 60 years. He said there's been no detectable human influences on hurricanes. Wildfires have declined about 25% globally since 2003, and despite the terrible fires we saw in California and Australia in 22, that year was one of the least active global fire years on record. Now, I just keep reading from this, and he sounds like a science denier. I mean, This is the guys on the other side of the climate change. He sounds like where we often are on this. And he says that in 7 years of study since he left the Obama administration, he says, as he's gone through, he says, it's not what I thought. He said, when I look at all the science, when I look at everything that's out there and look at where the scientific consensus is across the world for most of the scientific community, he said it's not the climate change stuff that we believed 7 years ago. So he actually has a new book out now called Unsettled. And you remember back then they said, hey, the science is settled. This thing is over and done with. His book, and again, he was the head of scientists under Obama. He says, no, it is not settled. It is unsettled. As a matter of fact, what's settled is on the other side. What's settled is that it is unsettled. There's not a clear side on this like the Obama administration argued, like Biden's arguing. So this is a huge piece of good news to see someone who actually did the study and in doing the study has come to a completely different conclusion. I love it when people love truth more than they love agendas. And this is what you see here with this. So that's really, really good news. And that's coming from someone you would not expect it from, which is why you haven't heard much about him. And he hasn't been asked on many programs in the mainstream media because it's just not the narrative they want today. But it still is good news because it is pursuing truth and what science teaches.
And put that in the context, too, David, of a year where science and seeking truth in the scientific community has been, an abysmal failure and been really cast to the side where the political agenda trumps the science. So it's double good news. The fact that there's still some out there that will, speak the truth regardless of what the politics of the issue might be. We kind of saw a test of the whole COVID scientific thing with, climate change, quote unquote, global warming, whatever term you want to use. That community or that issue has always seemed to lean towards the politics rather than the truth of the science. So this is actually really good news coming from that particular issue. All right, back over to Tim. What's our next piece of good news, Tim?
Well, guys, this one's from Florida, and there's been a lot of positive things happening from Florida. I actually saw polling recently. I don't have the article in front of me, but I'm sure in the next week or two we will cover this. But I recently saw polling that even though Florida is almost a 50-50 state when it comes to Republicans and Democrats, the overwhelming majority of people that live in Florida are supportive of Governor Ron DeSantis and how he's been handling all of the issues, all of the crisis. Well, here's an article that backs up nearly a month and a half ago now, and it's when 60 Minutes came out and really did a hit piece against Governor DeSantis. And what's super interesting is that you had Democrats from Florida stepping up and defending Governor DeSantis, saying that's not true at all. That's not what he did. That's not what he said. And Dad, as you mentioned, it's really great to see when people are intellectually honest, when they stand for what's right, when they stand for what's true, regardless of where the party is or isn't that they're aligned to. And this was an example that seeing some of these Democrats stand up and defend Governor Ron DeSantis in what was very clearly from 60 Minutes, a hit piece that was not based on being accurate or factual because there was so much that they cut out to manipulate the way that Governor Ron DeSantis looked. But seeing Democrats from Florida say that that's not true and accurate, that's a really encouraging and healthy sign for America that you have people that are not as concerned with their party line as they are with what is true. That's really, really good news. We're seeing that in Florida. Shift now to Arkansas. Governor Asa Hutchinson in Arkansas just a month or so ago signed a law that was designed to protect the religious rights of medical professionals. And this is something that, if you back up to the Obama administration, one of the things that happened under Obama is largely they said that we don't think medical doctors should have rights of medical conscience if they are any kind of government-funded facility, because if somebody comes in and they want to have a selective abortion, abortion on demand, that should be something that anybody who works in the hospital that is capable, they should not be able to refuse to do. For example, this abortion. Now, there's many other things we can include in that, but in this specific bill, it's called the Medical Ethics and Diversity Act. And the idea is it wants to protect the religious and moral objections that a medical professional might have with some selective surgeries or operations. And so specifically detailing the abortion on demand and transgender surgeries were things that were targeted in this bill, saying, look, if there's somebody that is morally opposed to taking a young boy and doing a surgery on them to remove their sexual anatomy from this boy to try to do the sexual or this operation to make this boy into, right, have this female anatomy, and they think that's morally wrong, you can't force them to do that. we live in a world that it's crazy to think that people could try to force you into doing that, but that is kind of where we are. So it is really encouraging to see Governor Asa Hutchinson sign this into law. Obviously, kudos to the people that pushed this through the House and the Senate. But guys, we've talked a lot in the last couple months about positive things, legislation happening in states, and actually at times, in spite of the governor. This is one from Kentucky with such an example where Democrat Governor Andy Beshears vetoed a school choice bill. And actually, when he vetoed it, he followed the talking points of the teachers' unions, of public school superintendents, saying it's not good for schools, it's not good for kids. But what this school choice bill did is it had, in essence, a voucher program where money would follow the students and they could go to actually other public school districts. They could go to a private school or a charter school. There were many areas they could do this. And when the governor vetoed this bill, the House and the Senate, which is a Republican majority, came back and they overrode the governor's veto. So this is now a law in Kentucky that school choice is an option with a tax voucher to follow the parents. Guys, there's a lot of really encouraging things happening around the nation in these state legislatures.
Yeah, and if I could just point out real quick, a lot of these good pieces of legislation that are getting passed, there's some of our legislators from the Pro-Family Legislators Conference. You know, Jason Rapert in Arkansas leading the charge on a lot of those, including the one today. So many other legislators that have been a part of our network for years, and part of the way people can help us support them is by supporting WallBuilders Live and helping us do our conference each year, getting the word out to your state legislators and encouraging them to come to the WallBuilders Pro-Family Legislators Conference. Tim, as we're closing out, I'm disappointed, man. I was looking for the Tommy Lee Jones trifecta. I thought you were going to give me three stories that reminded me of Tommy Lee Jones. You started with, the whole U.S. Marshals, immediately thought of him from The Fugitive. Then you went to the Texas Rangers, which I was again thinking of him from Lonesome Dove. So I guess maybe someday there'll be a movie about Ron DeSantis after he's president, and Tommy Lee Jones will play him. I don't know. Maybe.
I would love it.
See.
That'd be great.
Yeah. Lots of good news, guys. Sorry we're out of time for today. Thank y'all for sharing so much good news. Folks, there's more good news at our website, wallbuilderslive.com. And, of course, next Friday, we'll be piling on some more good news for you. Thanks so much for listening to WallBuilders Live.
We stand undivided, forever